I have spent a disproportionate amount of my life battling nonsense, not the interesting kind of nonsense, not the deep philosophical questions about the nature of reality. I mean the ordinary garden variety, soul-crushing nonsense of paperwork, bureaucracy, institutions, and people who follow rules without understanding what the rules are for. Let me tell you the story of the 13 signatures. The science teacher from the local city college asked me to give a talk. He offered $50. I said I wasn't worried about the money, but I knew from experience that dealing with city government meant drowning in forms. So I made a deal. I'd give the talk on one condition. I wouldn't have to sign my name more than 13 times, including the check. He laughed at first, and then with a strange confidence he said, 13 times, no problem. Then it started. First I had to sign a loyalty oath and sign it double. Then a release form for the city. Then a certification that I was properly employed as a professor to make sure nobody was hiring their wife or buddy for the $50. With each requirement, the number climbed. The poor teacher got more and more nervous, but we squeaked through 12 signatures, one left for the check. And then the trouble hit. They couldn't give me the money unless I signed a form confirming I'd actually given the talk. But if I signed the form, I couldn't sign the check. I'd used up my quota. I suggested the teacher sign it instead. He was there, he heard the talk. But no, it had to be me. He worked the phones for days, calling every office he could think of, and they all said the same thing. Impossible. You can't get the money without the signature. It's okay, I told him. I gave the talk. I don't need the money. But then came the beautiful twist. They could not give me the money either. It had already been earmarked. They had to pay me whether I wanted it or not, but they couldn't pay me because I wouldn't sign. There was no bureaucratic category for money that this man deserves but refuses to sign for. It took weeks to sort out. I have no idea what creative paperwork they invented to resolve it, but eventually I got my check and used the 13th signature to cash it. The whole thing was absurd, and that was exactly my point. My father raised me to be suspicious of pomp and authority. He was in the uniform business, and he knew the difference between a man in a uniform and the same man without one. It's the same man. The uniform doesn't change anything, and yet people treat you completely differently because of the costume you're wearing. This attitude made the Nobel Prize very uncomfortable for me. When they called to tell me I'd won at 4 a.m, my first response was to say, I'm sleeping, and hang up. My wife asked who it was, and I said, they told me I won the Nobel Prize. She couldn't believe it. I'm always kidding around, but this time I'd accidentally caught her. After the initial excitement wore off, I started to panic. I seriously considered refusing it. I called a reporter from Time magazine off the record and asked if there was a way to decline without making a bigger fuss than accepting. He told me there wasn't. Refusing would generate 10 times more attention, so I was stuck. The Swedish consul wanted to throw a reception. He came to my office with his guest list. The governor of California, Getty the oilman, some actress, 300 important people. My list had 8 people. My neighbor, my artist friend Jerry. There was, needless to say, 0 overlap between the two lists. I was so miserable about the whole production that I called the consul back and canceled. And here's the wonderful part. He was relieved. He didn't want to organize the damn party either. Nobody wanted to come, including the guest of honor. The host was thrilled to be off the hook. Everybody was happy. The prize itself, the work it was for, I'd already gotten all the reward I needed from that. I got it in the pleasure of figuring things out and in seeing other people use what I'd done. A pile of letters arrived from childhood friends who recognized my name in the newspaper, saying things like, I know him, he's the kid I used to play with. That part was wonderful. The rest, the ceremonies, the speeches, the mandatory dinner with the King of Sweden, was torture for someone who'd been raised to think royalty and pomp were ridiculous. The students in Sweden, I must say, were delightful. They had a ceremony where they gave each Nobel laureate the Order of the Frog, and you had to make a frog noise. Years earlier, I'd read Aristophanes' play The Frogs and noticed that the Greek brek, kek, kek is actually a very accurate imitation. So when my turn came, I gave them a frog noise that would have made Aristophanes proud. That part I enjoyed. But the rest of it, the way the prize changed everything, the way it made it impossible to just walk into a high school and give a casual talk to the physics club without it turning into an assembly of 300 students, that drove me crazy. I once arranged with some Irvine students to put up posters announcing that Professor Henry Warren from the University of Washington would be giving a talk about proton structure. Nobody came except the kids who actually cared about physics, which was exactly the audience I wanted. Then I showed up and said Professor Warren had called in sick and asked me to cover. It worked beautifully until the faculty advisor found out and got furious that he'd been excluded. This is the same kind of institutional thinking I encountered when I served on the California State Curriculum Commission to evaluate math textbooks. 300 pounds of books arrived at my house. I read them all. My wife said it was like living over a volcano, long periods of quiet, and then blue, an explosion from the basement. The books were atrocious. They were written by people who didn't understand what they were teaching. They tried to be rigorous with their new math, but got everything slightly wrong. They'd have kids translating numbers from base 7 to base 5, an utterly useless exercise that nobody in the history of the world has ever needed to do. And when they finally tried to connect math to science, the example was catastrophic, listing the temperatures of stars by color, including green stars and violet stars, which don't exist, and then asking students to add the temperatures together, add them together. What conceivable purpose could that serve? Nobody has ever added star temperatures. And then came the masterpiece. One of the books in a 3-book set arrived completely blank. The publisher had missed the deadline and submitted it with just the covers and nothing inside. And several of the committee members had given it a rating. They'd been evaluating books based on the publisher's reputations or the other books in the set or God knows what, but certainly not by reading them because there was nothing to read. That's when I realized the whole system was a kind of cargo cult, just like I'd later describe in my Caltech commencement speech. Everyone was going through the motions of evaluation, filling out forms, attending meetings, giving ratings without doing the actual work of reading the books. The form was perfect. The runway was built. The wooden headphones were on, but no planes were landing. And this is, I think, the common thread through all these experiences. The 13 signatures, the Nobel circus, the blank textbook that got rated. People follow procedures and forget what the procedures were designed to accomplish. The loyalty oath doesn't make anyone loyal. The ceremony doesn't make the physics better. The rating form doesn't ensure that anyone's read the book. The only thing that actually works is the thing itself, giving the talk, doing the physics, reading every last one of 300 pounds of textbooks and telling people what's actually in them. Everything else is just bamboo headphones.